Hi, welcome everyone. So this is January 20th, 2023, and welcome for this dialogue with the author with the Taos Institute. We're very excited to have you all here. And we are here with Stanley Witkin and talking about his book, Finding Lenny. So I am Alex Arnold. I'm the program director at the Taos Institute. We are a nonprofit educational organization, and we promote relational, social constructionist, and appreciative ideas across disciplines, so education, healthcare, organization development, much more. We believe that it is through a relational process that we create the world that we want to live in. And we share these resources and practices through in many, many ways. So on our website, the taosinstitute.net, you can find books that we publish. There are recordings, dissertations, podcasts, videos. There are so many resources for you all to explore. And we are a volunteer-based organization. So if you're so inclined to support our work, we invite you to make a donation to support the Taos Institute. So we have lots of people gathering today, still letting people in, and I'm going to pass it on very quickly to Stanley. So Stanley, welcome. Thank you so much for hosting this conversation today about your book, Finding Lenny.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating in this dialogue, and it's very nice to see so many familiar faces. Thank you for supporting this, and also many new faces. So thank you as well. I've been told that this is the first time that one of these dialogues with authors has been about around a novel. So I'm grateful for this opportunity, and because it is a novel, I suspect my presentation will probably be different from those who have presented academic or professional works. For one thing, when I tell you about the book, I'm going to leave out any so-called spoilers that might eliminate the anticipation of what might happen if you're reading the book or your enjoyment of the book. So I'm going to have to be careful about that. And those of you who may have read it, when you speak, I'm going to also, if you speak, I'm going to also ask you to be mindful of not spoiling the book for others. So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, by way of introduction, prior to becoming a novelist, I had quite a long academic career, and I still do in a certain sense, all in social work. Beginning at the University of Minnesota and then getting a MSW and doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin. And also along the way, I picked up an honorary doctoral degree in social science from the University of Lapland in Finland. And I've held a number of faculty positions at Cornell, Florida State University, and the University of Vermont, which was my longest tenure, and where I'm now a professor emeritus, having retired from there in 2017. And I'm also currently now an adjunct professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm also the co-founder and head of an organization called the Global Partnership for Transformative Social Work, which promotes social constructionist and related frameworks in the service of contributing to a more just, sustainable, and peaceful future. After I left UVM, Vermont, I moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, where I am now located. And I currently live here with my spouse, Franny, who also is an artist and designed the cover of Finding Lenny, if you like the cover. Which I do, and our precocious dog named Pico, who you might hear barking in the background. We'll see. So my plan for the next hour is to start off talking about my own journey from academic to fiction author, and how the process of writing Finding Lenny was similar and different from most other academic writing. Then when I get through that, I'll give a brief summary of the book and some of the themes I wanted to explore in the book. And, since this session is called a dialogue with authors, I'm really hoping to leave enough time so that we can at least approximate a dialogue virtually, or at least hear your comments, talk about your own writing journeys or your writing experiences, and take questions as well. So we'll see how it goes. So in terms of my getting right into it anyway, in terms of my own writing journey, I was well-schooled and quite productive in the craft of academic writing, having published quite a few journal articles, book chapters, and several books. So how did I get from there to here? Well, I'm going to give you an abridged version of the story because we don't have the time for the full version, nor probably do you need to hear it all. But when I think back, I think beginning with my doctoral studies in Wisconsin, I was socialized very much into expressing my ideas in ways that would conform to the meta theory of traditional scientific research. For example, striving for something called objectivity by using what I thought to be neutral language of observation and numbers, keeping myself as an author invisible, and strictly following APA style. And I was a true believer. The literary and the scientific were very separate. So a change in my views about writing, therefore, began with a change in how I thought about science and research. And this was not an overnight realization, but a change that evolved over many, many years. And it was influenced by many events and serendipitous encounters. One of my earliest ones, which was very notable and was just, in some ways, just chance, was the very first academic conference I ever attended when I was working as a caseworker in rural Wisconsin. And somehow, which I still don't quite understand, I was allowed to go to a conference, which I picked primarily because of the location in Colorado, which I had never been at the time. So I went to this conference, and the primary speaker was a psychologist named Michael Mahoney. Some of you might know his work. Michael Mahoney was a doctoral student of the great psychologist Albert Bandura at Stanford. And at the time, Michael Mahoney had just graduated, and he was talking about, he was a behaviorist like Bandura, and he was talking about what seemed to be very radical at the time for behaviorists, which was that people actually had thoughts. Sounds kind of funny right now, but that's what it was. And I remember going to a presentation he did. It was quite a small conference, so you were kind of up close and personal. But he talked about a presentation was titled "Self-Control in the Pigeon." So that was my encounter with and Mahoney, and then he did some other seminars there. But it wasn't what he said that was so important. It was just the fact that it was my first conference, and I got to kind of know a little Mike Mahoney a little bit, and I followed him after that. And so it turned out, unbeknownst to me, that Mike Mahoney became quite interested in the philosophy of science and the psychology of scientists, and he sort of dragged me along, in a sense, into that world. So that was very fortuitous, and took me in that direction. And of course, another influence was being exposed to social constructionist ideas. Very early on, some of Ken Gergen's very early articles about social psychology as history and things like that. So that was important. Meeting people in social work who are interested in understanding alternative ways of doing inquiry, of understanding social life, all of these things and others had an effect on how I was thinking about research and then about writing research eventually. So I started to view how we wrote as influencing what we wrote or what we could write, and how we represented what we took as the real. I also began to see scientific writing as a literary genre in itself, albeit one that denied it was a genre. It's similar to how it denied that an author was present in the text of research. As Andrew Sparks has written some time ago, he called research reports as examples of persuasive fictions that employ specific literary strategies to convince you of their argument. I started to think more and more in that way. And back in 1998, dating myself, I was fortunate to be appointed as the editor of the journal Social Work, which at least at the time was the most widely circulated journal in the field, in the world. And I got to commission a special issue on writing differently in social work. So besides my own editorial essay, which I called Writing Social Work, in which I questioned why we insisted that authors must write in APA style and why was it relevant for social workers, I invited others to write articles in the style of essays, memoirs, and autoethnography. And the latter, the autoethnography, became particularly influential as a way of writing differently in its positioning between research and literature, and its particular emphasis on using literary techniques, narrative, and creating emotive text. I was impressed by a lot of the autoethnographies I read, particularly how engrossing they were and how evocative they were. I mean, who of us has ever cried reading a research article? And also I was impressed by how socially embedded the analyses were and the depth of which I learned about the topics that were being researched autoethnographically. And when I started to integrate autoethnography into my research courses, I found that students also responded very enthusiastically. In fact, they were a bit incredulous that they could be in a research course and be reading things that actually were gripping and interesting. So here was, research they enjoyed reading and could actually use in their practice. And some years later, I explored autoethnography further in an edited book I did called Narrating Social Work Through Autoethnography, which also was very well received by those who read it. So continuing the journey, so I left UVM in 2017, like I said, and I had more time then to explore new ways of expressing ideas. And probably, I'm guessing, like many of you, some of the most impactful and meaningful writing in my life has not been academic tomes, but rather literature and poetry. Long before I ever thought about being an academic, literature exposed me to new worlds, new ideas, and new possibilities. So I decided to try to combine creativity and meaningful ideas in a compelling story and write a novel. So unlike academic writing with its standard formats and rules, there's no one size fits all for writing, especially fiction writing. Different authors have different ways of going about their work. For example, some need to outline their work in advance. Others do not find outlines helpful. I fell into the latter camp. For me, the process of writing was an extension, in a way, of autoethnography, in the sense that I began to use my own life experiences as a starting point. What some people have called factionalization instead of fictionalization. Beyond knowing that I wanted to make the story informative and thought-provoking, interesting and engaging, I didn't know what the story would be about fully. But since I consider writing to be an expression of thinking and a kind of dialogue with the self, I decided to just trust emergence and start writing and see how the story would unfold. And it did. Sometimes in ways that were unexpected. As the characters in the book developed, they almost gained volition. That is, they would do things that I recognized as in character or out of character. There's an old adage about writing, very simply put, writers write. An important part of my process was to write every day. If nothing else, I'm quite disciplined. And writing to me is like sculpture. You need to start with a lump of clay before you can make something out of it. For writers, our clay is words. You need to put down words, and then you can begin shaping it into something recognizable. So getting words on the paper was a critical first step. There's a freedom when writing a novel to explore topics that might enrich your story or make it more interesting without a concern for academic conventions like referencing. Also, the context in your character's history, their relationships are very important for creating dialogue and their reactions that further the story. And of course, you're free to use a lot of different literary techniques, dialogue, thinking, emotion, remembrances. In fact, in Finding Lenny, I use a lot of song lyrics, poetry, all things that I hope enrich the story. I also used some dialogue and remembrances to as a way of introducing perhaps many readers to social constructionist ideas as well, without doing it in a sort of academic sort of way, but as part of a story. I was surprised in writing the novel of how much research I actually did about different topics, about scenes that appeared in the book, looking up many things that I didn't know about, but I wanted to include. So in some ways, this was similar to writing a scholarly paper, although I didn't have to limit myself in terms of my sources or make sure they were credible in an academic sense. I also tried to keep my potential readers in mind. Obviously, the relationship with readers is different than in a traditional academic work. Readers are not being challenged to comprehend my analyses, but they're invited to engage in the story. My task was to bring them into the characters' lives on an intimate level. I wasn't writing from an expert position, but as a narrator of other people's lives. Readers are witnesses to those lives. And I existed as an author through these characters, and in a larger sense, the story. I'm not presenting facts, but descriptions and expressions of lived experiences, such as emotions, reflections, doubts, surprises, successes, failures, goals, friendships, fantasies, and so on. Also, as many of you probably know, writing is rewriting. I paid a lot of attention to how I wrote. I had to, for example, cutting out text that didn't move the story forward. Word choice was big. Deleting unnecessary words was quite common. Particularly important was showing as opposed to telling. And in showing, you use actions, thoughts, words, sensory details to engage the reader. That's very important, particularly in novel writing. I'd say in all writing, but it's particularly important in novel writing, where telling is what provides a context. You're telling about. Showing is much more direct and visceral. And that became very important to edit my text with that in mind. So I can't tell you how many rewrites and edits this book went through, but it did. And I had some early readers who were very, very helpful. You know, yeah, it's very hard to do this alone. I had a publisher who was helpful. And I also found, particularly in the latter stages, that reading out loud was helpful. I read the entire book out loud to myself. You'll be surprised, the different ways of doing this will pick up different aspects of the writing that you might want to change. So I think I'll stop there in terms of my process and turn to a very brief summary of the story. Again, it's going to be brief because I don't want to give you any spoilers. So the book, finally, so 400 plus pages later, I finally had this book, Finding Lenny. And not surprisingly, Lenny Isaacson, the main character, is a retired social work professor. Okay, someone I know well. You write about what you know, especially in a debut novel. He was nearing 70 years of age, and he lived with his dog in an apartment in Burlington, Vermont. Since retiring, Lenny's life has become quite routine, and he misses his interaction with students and colleagues. He thinks a lot about his own aging and how he will be spending the rest of his life. Lenny's primary social outlet is his friend Jerry, who he meets often at a local cafe. Although Jerry's not an academic and more middle of the road than the left-leaning Lenny, Jerry is a willing listener of Lenny's thinking out loud and about different topics like death, reincarnation, psychiatry, and belief change. Although on the surface, their relationship seems quite unlikely, it worked for them. And they both benefited in a way. I mean, Lenny respected Jerry for his good listening habits and for actually bringing up questions sometimes that he wouldn't ordinarily hear. And Jerry appreciated just Lenny's difference from his usual conversations. And so they enjoyed each other. Life begins to change for Lenny when he encounters a bedraggled person sitting in the street holding a sign. The words on the sign are vaguely familiar, so Lenny stops and talks to him. The man, whose name is Ezekiel, talks in enigmatic ways that Lenny finds unsettling. And it turns out that this is the first of several encounters that Lenny has with Ezekiel, or people he believes is Ezekiel, since he appears in different locations and in different guises, not always sitting on the street. So Lenny is troubled by this encounter and some other things that happen. And he winds up going to an open mic night at a local club to distract himself from these unsettling encounters and other things. He thought seeing some amateur performers would be a nice way to divert his attention. However, while he's there, he experiences a catastrophic event that changes his life. It just upends everything, and the life of his friend, Jerry. So in addition then to the trauma that he experienced, Lenny's part in this event becomes public. And this leads to threats from members of an extremist organization and a visit from the FBI. He also connects with a woman named Patricia, who was also at the club at the time with her daughter. And their relationship turns out to be fortuitous when Lenny encounters a threatening person later on from the extremist group. Meanwhile, his friend Jerry is also having an increasingly difficult time, and Lenny's efforts to help him don't seem to be working. His encounters with Ezekiel continue, and Lenny begins to wonder whether Ezekiel is even a real person. Nevertheless, their interactions are provocative and leads Lenny to reflect on his situation in new ways. Lenny struggled to balance helping others and taking care of himself. Things come to a crossroads when he is confronted with a dangerous situation. And here's the cliffhanger that I can't reveal. But how he deals with this situation will take him on a new, unforeseen adventure. Okay, besides the overt and the obvious story that I just told, Finding Lenny has other themes. How unexpected events can change our lives in unpredictable ways, the relationships and their impact on our lives, the sometimes fuzzy lines between what we call real and what we call not real, our attempts to make sense or find meaning in impactful events, particularly those that seem senseless or random. And of course, people will read the book in many ways. And I've already seen this in some of the reviews from the book. Some people will highlight the social commentary aspects of the book. Some will highlight the spiritual and mystical references in the book. Some talk about social constructionist ideas that are integrated into the book, some philosophical ideas. The meaning of the book is really a relation between the readers, from my point of view, the readers and the text, and indirectly the author. I've already seen that the story might be interpreted very differently than I might have thought about it when I was writing it. And of course, there's no right or wrong here, which leads to the richness, I think, of novels as a source of ideas and new perspectives. Okay, so as I said, I was hoping to leave time, and according to my time, we're about halfway through. So what I'm going to ask is that we open it up, and we can do this in many ways. Some of you, I hope, or I know, have read the book, and you can feel free to share, your take on your reading of the book. I think that could be interesting to others. Also, anyone who wants to comment on their own writing journey and where they are at with that and their own experiences, I think that would be very relevant for all of us. And of course, if you have any questions, we can give those a shot as well. So I know it's always hard to speak up in these Zoom meetings, but I'm going to encourage you to do so. And I won't pick on the people I know, but they know anyway. Okay, so let me stop there and let's see if we can have a little dialogue as this was billed as. And thank you for your attention. Really appreciate it.
Feel free to just unmute yourself if you want to speak.
That'd be great, yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dana Spett. I'm actually a DSW student scheduled to graduate this May from Rutgers. And I have a child who's doing a PhD at UVM, so I love the intersectionality there. I'm particularly drawn to ethnography and narrative work, especially because I work in the field of equine-assisted services and social work. So using horses and nature, and a majority of my population are individuals who are nonverbal. So the concept of being an observer and telling stories is interesting to me, but I am finding some conflict from an R1 research institute on the writing style. So I resonated with you when you talk about that conflict between APA 7, the strictness there, and trying to describe something that may not be tangible, that it really is a reaction and it's feelings based. So I'm wondering if you have any insight. Again, I'm thinking about how I would have to outline, but I would love to be able to show and tell. And that's one of my writing professor's comments. But I love the idea of storytelling.
Yeah. Well, I can respond, but I would also encourage others to respond as well. And yeah, I'm probably not the consultant you want to hire to write an R1 grant. I did write one when I was a doctoral student, and that was the last one. But you know, as you know, a doctoral student, what you can and can't do is going to depend very much on your institution and particularly your advisor, your doctoral committee. And I think what I would encourage you is to look into autoethnographies. And there is quite a growing literature there that you can find. In fact, I just wrote an article. I still do these other kind of things a little bit. And there's a special issue in a British journal that just came out on autoethnography and social work, if you're interested. And you can email me and I could give you the reference. Alec, do people have my email address or could they get it?
Yes, they have a link to your Taos Associate page on the website and your email is there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'd be happy to give you those references, but that in terms of the work you're doing and being acceptable in the academic community, that might be your best bet, or at least to try that out. I mean, obviously that they probably won't accept a novel unless you're in literature as your dissertation, but I would again welcome other people to chime in on this, because your own experience would be valuable as well.
Stanley, this is, excuse me, Wendy Ellis. I first just want to say I'm in absolute awe. I wrote this in the chat, but you probably haven't had a chance to look at it, that your description in itself is literary. I'm fascinated. I want to get the recording of this, keep replaying it, because it's so lyrical and lovely. And what I marvel at, and I'm sort of curious about, having also been in academics and been trained as a social scientist, and I'm also a clinician, but when I write, my writing, I revert back to my scholarly and social scientist roots. It's almost like a reflex. And so I'm curious how you break that habit. I mean, you did a lovely description, but sometimes do you find yourself just kind of, oh no, there I go again?
It's really a great question, and I would say absolutely. If you could have seen the very first version of Finding Lenny, that you would have seen something quite different. And it was much more academic than I even recognized. And I think it took other people really looking at it and telling me that it was too didactic. And I didn't even recognize it at first. You really do, I think, if you're a well-socialized academic like I was, and still am, really, you have to unlearn a lot of this. You have to unlearn these habits. And that's where, like, the showing and telling comes in, for example. I had to go back and identify, for example, so many places where I was telling and try to say, how can I show this? What is the character feeling? What are they doing? Where is their how is their body feeling? How are they holding themselves? All the kind of things that would help give the reader the experience. And quite frankly, there's still, I could go through the novel even now and probably find, many places where I could change. When you end a novel or a lot of works, it's always there's always an arbitrary aspect to that. You just say, okay, I've done 7 revisions. I have to finish. I want to be alive when my novel is actually published, So you make these kinds of decisions. But you're right. I wish I had a formula for it, but I think it's just having others that you trust look at what you're writing, giving you the kind of feedback, asking for that kind of feedback, and just keep at it. The other thing I think, again, if you're interested in writing differently, especially novel writing or fictional, what we call fictional writing, is reading is very related to writing, and reading writers that you really admire their prose and looking carefully at how they describe their characters, how they develop their plots, and so on, is also very helpful. And at least that was helpful to me as well. So, looking at what for us are exemplars, I think is another way that helps further our writing. So
thank you so much. You are an inspiration, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Other folks?
Stanley, I've got a question for you. This is Ed Candace speaking.
Yeah, hi, Ed.
Hi. About halfway through the book, there's a statement that popped out to me. It says, all so-called fiction is grounded in what we take as real. And what it's struck me that in a couple of ways, one is what we take as real. So your book, without giving away any spoilers, you interweave many ways of seeking what is real. The book is called Finding Lenny, and I see seeking as a big theme. So mystical explorations, it includes social relationship exploration, social science and philosophy and music and poetry explorations, and visionary and dream experience explorations. And the other part of it then is, this implies for you as an author, there is some connection between let's call it fiction, but actually your life, as you refer to in your introduction. I don't know how much you're comfortable saying, but I'm curious as to how your own experience beyond the academic side that you described leading to the book might reflect the interweaving of all that kind of seeking.
Yeah. A lot of the book, let me back up. There are a number of experiences that the character Lenny has that were based on experiences I had. Sure, and especially when I started. I started, with what I knew, and what I knew was my own life, my own experiences, and my own seeking. Yes, and so in terms of like what you said, yeah, my own seeking as a young person and then getting older went in many different directions. But in some ways, so I would say many of those experiences are based on experiences I had, but I also felt the freedom to embellish them in the service of the story. Okay, so I didn't feel like, oh, I really did this or I really didn't do this. That it was also, I had that license to say, well, this was based on something I knew. Like in the book, there's Lenny talks about when he was a young man, he has an encounter with a spiritual master who lives in India, right? And that's a real person, and I use that person's actual name. But the description of it, I'll leave it. I'm not going to say more than just to say that, again, yes, there was something similar in my own life when I was younger. And but then I took license in how it was described in the book. So I don't know if that answers your question, Ed, or not, but what do you think?
Well, yeah, that helps. And I think it's also good that you're still trying to protect the, hiding the spoilers. But I appreciate reading the book, and it's gave additional vantage on how I've known you more through the academic and conference venues. I think you made a really nice contribution, so appreciate it, Stan.
Yeah, and I did. I'll just add quickly that, certainly what I did want to do was to introduce this idea of that there are many ways of knowing, right? And that the lines, like you said in that quote, the lines between what we think are real or not is really socially constructed, and it really just it depends on a lot of factors. And I wanted it to be blurry, and that was part of it, and that was part of it in the character of Ezekiel. I never, in the book, it never really resolves that question about, Lenny wonders if Ezekiel is real or not. And it really isn't resolved. I think at one point in the story, he likens him to the rabbit that in the movie James Stewart had a rabbit called Harvey, remember, that he used to talk with, and only he could see. And so, but so that was intentional in terms of trying to find ways to express that. So thanks Ed for that comment.
Can I add on to that a minute? Hi there, Stan. Hi, Michelle. I'm excited to see you. So I read the book, okay, and I am a writer myself, and I was an English lit major, so I love novels. I felt that, I guess I know you, and of course that was what was a little bit confusing, but it was also I think it felt to me like a memoir, but then there were those places where it felt, as you were saying to Ed, it felt usefully constructed, to embellished, and added on to, and so it didn't feel like just a pure memoir at all, or pure autobiography. So that it was really, and it's sort of, I thought then, and in light of what some of the others have said too, that it kind of morphed into this beautiful relational fiction. And so that was sort of special, I thought. The other piece I'm curious about is with the academic and the personal. Is Jerry really, is he functioning as a template for your sort of philosophical, and for Lenny's philosophical and theoretical musings? But thanks, Stan.
Yeah. Is that how you took it? Is that how you saw Jerry?
Pardon me?
Is that how you saw Jerry? You asked me.
Is that
about
how
Jerry.
I saw? Well, I thought it was one possibility, but it was also Jerry. I saw Jerry also, though, as kind of a part of you in your thinking.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I really, don't know what to say. I mean, I thought probably maybe that's true. I don't even know. I think, Jerry also represented a friend. It was also about friendship and relationship in addition,
Oh, yeah.
and what that means, and as having read the book, as the book goes on, that relationship is tested in different ways. So, again, I think, what readers like yourself see in the book is just as valid as me. I know Bobby, and she knows me, And so I think people who know me and will read the book differently than people who don't. I found that very true. I found that in some of the earlier drafts that I had people read. People, for example, who weren't academics had very different takes on some of the books that the academics did. And all of that's okay, really. And I think the more ways people can read different things into it, I feel like, wow, that's great. That's great. So, yeah.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby.
Stan, I have a couple questions I'd like to pose to you. I'm speaking from the position of having read the book. As a social work professor for many years, do you see a place for this book to be used in a social work curriculum?
That the question?
That's the first question.
Of course, every course should have this book in the social work curriculum. That was an easy one, Dan. Come on.
Which course would you put it in?
Everyone. It's quite adaptable. No, I don't know. I think it, could it fit in my own courses? Of course, but I think it has to do with how the course is constructed, how people teach, whether the people use non-academic sources in their work. Does their institution even allow them to do that? Do they risk censor if they do? I think there are many factors that I think would come into play. I mean, even when I was using autoethnography, I was lucky to be in a position where I could do that. I would guess that that's very unusual in a research course, in particular, for students to be reading autoethnographies. So, do I think there's a place for literature? Yeah. I know Bobby taught a course, right? A doctoral course, was it, or a master's course at University of Pennsylvania, where she used literature, right?
Yeah, is that actually, yeah. Yep, social policy through literature.
Yeah, so I think it depends on how things are set up and
When I used to teach social work practice classes, there was always a fiction book involved.
Great.
Different authors. I just felt it made it more real, and it was more of a showing than a telling, like you're talking about.
Right. Right.
My other question is, if this book should be made into a movie, who would you prefer to play the role of Lenny?
I think you would be good in it, Dan.
Not an actor.
Oh, well, that makes it more real.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll leave that to you. That's
Okay.
Yeah. I like the way you think, though. That's good. Maybe as an agent, you could have a role.
And just congratulations on this presentation. It's fantastic, and I'm glad so many people are able to listen to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
There was a question in the chat from Robin, and she had to leave a few minutes ago, but she said she would catch the answer in the recording. And she was asking about your choice of publisher. How did you choose the publisher?
Okay, that's an interesting question too. And part of this was determined, I will confess, by my research on publication and on my age. Okay, what I learned, and remember, this was a new venture for me and a new field. Academic publishing, and like I said, I've published several books, but is different than fiction publishing. Different, very different in a lot of ways. So one of the things I learned, though, is that if you want to go the traditional route in fiction publishing, most advice is you have to find an agent. And then the agent tries to sell your work to a publisher. And this is a process that could literally take years. not uncommon, in fact, at least from what I read, could take years. And even after that, then even if you're accepted, the process between being accepted by a publisher and the book actually seeing the light of day could take also years. Well, like I said earlier, I wanted to be alive when the book was still published. I mean, I hope to live a long time, but still, I was aware of the time frame, and did I really want to wait potentially 4 years, let's say, and with no guarantees either. So that was one consideration. And the other one was, however, I was hesitant, and maybe this is my own academic background, I was hesitant to just publish it on my own, even though it's becoming quite a big or popular way of doing books, and that, because the ability to publish a book by yourself is quite easy compared to how it was at one time. And there's a big, industry of self-publishing. So I went for somewhere in between. I started to doing research on what is called hybrid publishing, sort of the as the name implies, it's in between traditional publishing and self-publishing. And what it basically comes down to is that a hybrid publisher, and again, you have to be careful, and try to find reputable publishers in any area. But what it basically means is that you share some of the upfront costs, but they function pretty much as a traditional publisher after that. And the royalty rate is higher because you're sharing some of the upfront costs. So the return is higher. Okay. So I did some research. I found this publisher. They claim to accept only 20% of the submissions. I like that in some ways. Just through my interaction with different publishers, I just, chose this one. And, they seem to have it together and be able to provide me with what I wanted. And so really, I didn't know them. It was just through my own research, looking around, settling on this, what I called on this hybrid publishing, which was between the traditional and self. And of course, for different people, different routes might be different. What would work for them? And I'm already now that I have the bug, I'm already at work on the next book, and I haven't even decided at this point. Now that I've had this experience, where I would go next. So that was how I got to where I am with this publisher. Other people have some comments? I think we have a couple of minutes left, Alex. Is that right?
Yes, we have time for maybe one more question or comment.
Question or comment or anything? It's been
Sorry,
lovely.
I'm still not sure about that.
That was my phone. That wasn't the comment I wanted. Okay.
Dragona asked about the choice of title. How did you come up with that title?
Yeah. Okay. It was funny. It was kind of spontaneous in a way. And I think maybe it has something to do with what Ed was talking about, this different kind of seeking, and the process that the character Lenny went through was one of, I think, a kind of a discovery, a self-discovery. So it was somewhat metaphorical in that sense, but really, I mean, it was just in this sense, sometimes you could labor over these things and you try to think and you come up with 10 different possibilities. For some reason, I don't know, it just popped into my head, and I sort of used it as a working title, and it felt right. And then when I got with the publisher, they said they liked it. So that was it. Yeah, it really wasn't something I labored over. It just seemed to fit, and the words just came to me. Yeah. So that's how it happened. Thanks.
Anyone else?
It's great hearing from you. So
I just want to thank you for this invitation and for sharing this. Thank you very much, Stan.
yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming, taking your time to be here.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. Stanley, thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing with
Yeah.
us today. And there are lots of great comments in the chat just saying thank you for your generosity, for sharing your story, and how much people have appreciated listening to the conversation, and others who couldn't stay the whole time who will look at the recording. So that will be available probably within a week or so. And if you're registered, you will receive it in an email. Otherwise, it's also available on the Taos Institute website or in YouTube on our playlist, Dialogue with the Author playlist. And so thank you for joining us. Have a nice rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. And Stanley, any last few words?
No, just again, I thank you so much for just showing up and participating and listening. And the only other thing I'd say is if you decide to read the book, I would love to hear from you. However you think about it. I mean, that's really what for authors, hearing from the readers is the most important thing you could possibly have. So please, if you do read it, let me hear from you. That would be my one last request. And thanks again.